Welcome back, listeners, to the latest Arcade Attack podcast. I've got two guests on today's show, two real legends. We've got Ian Dunlop and Neill Glancy. They are known, well, they've worked in huge amount of games together, but probably best known for their time on DMA Design. So guys, thank you so much for your time today, Ian and Neill. Brilliant to have you on the show.
Thanks for the invite. Nice to be here.
Brilliant. I'd love to start actually, guys, because obviously you guys have had some amazing success in the gaming industry, and you've worked really closely together. But before Ian, I'll start with you if that's okay. So how did you first enter the video game industry, and do you remember the first game you ever worked on?
Oh, geez. Yeah, that was professionally, that was 87. I worked for a company called Elite Systems Limited, I think. Known for their owner who drove a Lotus Esprit Turbo, like kind of like the wish of all young programmers. Hey, I want a sports car. But the first thing I worked on, I can't even remember what it was called. It was some sort of side-scrolling beat-em-up thing for the ZX Spectrum, and that was a complete disaster for me. I was too young. It was like a horrible work environment, and it was like, I guess it was like 6 months later, I ended up doing a Codemasters title, which was my first released title, which was International Rugby Simulator.
Oh, nice.
For the ZX Spectrum. So that was fun. That was the first thing.
Brilliant. And Neill, same question. How did you get into the industry, and what was the first game you ever worked on?
I really sort of got into the industry from sort of a fascination with computer graphics, as a child, looking at these coin-op games and, Atari 2600s and thinking, wow, this is fascinating, and how can I do this for a job? And spent a number of years working with, pixel art programs, the Spectrum and later the Amiga and the ST. And one of the first the first game I worked on was First Contact, which was for the Amiga and ST, which was a full color sprite-based game. I did all of the characters and animations and particle effects. And as was the case back then, it's like, well, we don't have someone to do that, so who's gonna design the maps, or who's gonna make all the sounds? Yeah. So I ended up drawing the kind of jigsaw pieces of the maze, such sort of top-down view in the game. And then fitting them together to sort of make the levels. So I hadn't really planned on designing the levels of the game, but the programmer was like, well, I'm not going to do that, so you can put these things together. I was like, okay, fair enough.
Oh, nice.
So that was my first sort of exploration into design. But it was a lot of fun, and I learned a lot, and then actually after that went on to work on a few Spectrum things. And so there you go. That's probably the story behind the first one anyway.
I appreciate it. I've got to ask actually, how did you two first meet? Did you meet while working at DMA Design, or did you meet before? Or I'd love to hear the story.
Yeah. Do you want to go for that one, Ian?
Sure. So yeah, I was I guess just looking for computer stuff like video games, and I heard of this store. It was I can't even remember what street it was on, but it was like a kind of little boutique video game store that had like Atari ST stuff and Commodore Amiga, and that's where I met Neill. And I guess we just connected because we had this love and passion of all things kind of video games and being creative, and just kind of hit it off. And that's how it's. I actually bought my Commodore Amiga at that store, and that kind of led to DMA Design. Mm-hmm. And getting that kind of first gig.
Yeah, I remember Ian coming into the store because I used to work at this computer shop called Soft Centre in Edinburgh, and we were just sort of bullshitting and talking about games and stuff, and Ian was like, oh, I'm actually working on a game, I'm making a game myself. And I was like, holy shit, really, you're working on a game? That's awesome. Can I work with you on that game? Can I help? And at that time, I believe I just finished First Contact. I'd maybe been done with it for a few months. So I'd actually shipped a game, and so I mentioned to him, I have actually finished a game, and so we just kind of got talking, and Ian was working away on Walker, I believe, at that time, and was lamenting his disappointment in some areas of the game, and I was like, well, maybe I could do some graphics, some backgrounds for you, or some animations of sprites and such. So I went away and I don't know, I spent probably a couple of months, maybe 2 or 3 months creating some test assets.
Yeah.
And then I gave them back to Ian. I'll let Ian take over the story here as to what happened after we put those test assets in the game.
Yeah. So, if memory serves me correctly, we collaborated on that, and Neill did this amazing work on the art. I mean, it really blew me away, just the attention to detail. Like if you think of the art that's in Walker right now as kind of a copy inspired by what Neill did, but not, I hate to say it, but not as good as.
Wow.
I think it would have been truly revolutionary had Neill's work gotten in the game. And I certainly don't want to upset anybody who also worked on the title. But I mean, that's how I felt at the time, was that, Neill had done this awesome work. We basically built a level, a lot of detail and animations and environmental effects, and just kind of like, maybe even, I seem to remember we embellished the story, like, there's a lot of kind of inspiration from things like Terminator and Aliens.
Akira.
And Akira. Yeah,
wow,
absolutely.
brilliant.
And so sorry, Neil.
No, I was just going to say a lot of the things that basically I added were, at that time, sprite animations were very basic. If you think about, say, Atari's Gauntlet game, the 4-player game, you're in a dungeon. But some of the things that I added to the test assets for Walker were things like inbuilt motion blur. So when characters moved quickly, they actually had motion blur, as well as some pretty complex cooked-in lighting. So when characters would run over the battlefield and they would fire a weapon, the weapon would create a muzzle flash, which would illuminate their face and their body, just for that one frame as they fired the weapon. And it would also create a kind of a backscatter light effect. So you would see the light being projected behind the character and their silhouette in the light. So there's a lot of very complicated lighting effects that were in the game, and none of this stuff existed back in the day, with sprite stuff. So it was pretty revolutionary. But unfortunately, I remember, I can see Ian's beginning to smile a bit here. I remember having the meeting with David Jones of DMA Design, and he basically said, hey, I'm really sorry to say this, but we cannot use your art, because if we use your art, basically we have to go back and revisit every single piece of art we've already done for the game, and bring it up to that standard. And we just don't really have time to do that. So, and we can't have one level that looks, completely sort of different in one way, and then have every other level be kind of, this other way. So it was really disappointing for both for both Ian and for myself, because, I put a lot of work into those assets, and they were very high quality. But at the end of the day, it had a silver lining, because Dave Jones was like, well, having said that we can't use this work, it's clear that it's obvious that you're talented, so we'll hire you, and you can come and work for us at DMA. So there was a silver lining at the end of the day.
And so, Neil, you were working in retail as well at the time then. I mean, even though you already released a game, I mean, that's incredible, really, when you think about it. Like in today's world, that wouldn't be the case, would it?
Yeah, well, I mean, I say the same thing to my son, when I'm talking to him about, working in jobs and careers and stuff. It's like, well, I used to go to work, 9 to 5 at the shop, and then I would come home and I would work from 8 o'clock till 1 or 2 in the morning, on my portfolio or stuff for Ian's game, and it's just, so I was burning the candle on both ends, basically, but that's what you want to do. If you're passionate about something and you want to learn, you have to push yourself and put in the hours, And in what I was working in at that time, which was graphics, it's very much, well, you have to prove yourself. You can't just tell people, no one's going to give you a job, because they're like, no, honestly, I'm really good at this, but I can't show you. But honestly, trust me, I'm awesome. So you have to have this big, varied portfolio of stuff, right? Space stuff, medieval stuff, character animation, spaceships, whatever, particle effects. And it takes a very long time to build that stuff up. And as we get further into this story, there was some interesting work that we did, some more sort of revolutionary graphic stuff that we did for Walker 2, which did not see the light of day also. But that's another story. Yeah.
We'll talk about Walker 2, don't worry. But I don't want to jump around too much, but Ian, I don't really quite, were you happy to sort of fill in the gaps of how you first got into DMA design? Because obviously you met Neill while you're still working there. Was Walker the first game you worked on, for example, or how did you get into DMA design?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to remember exactly when, but basically I was looking kind of outside of Codemasters. Like I was a contractor for them. And I just got on the Amiga and was kind of, like Neill said, just all that work you do in your own time to kind of hone your skills. I mean, I was working on the Amiga, learning that. And then I started looking around, and I seem to remember there was an ad for DMA Design looking for a contractor. And so I drove up there one time for an interview, and I guess they liked what they heard. And it was strange. It was like, they were like, hey, we've got this idea for a shooting game. And I was presented these frames of graphics that another programmer had done. I think his name was Scott. And he had basically he'd written code to render out this head of the walker kind of turning in the different positions. Like there was only about 16 frames. And they were like, could you take that and make a game? that was it. And I was like, yeah, cool, I'll make a game with that. And then they kind of like the only other directive was Lemmings, like, and so I was like, hell yeah, I'll do that. And so I got to town and started working on it, and I guess came up with an initial kind of control thing. Like they had happened to render the head out looking from right to left. Yeah. And so I basically based the game on moving right to left.
I mean, even that's quite unusual, isn't it?
It's backwards.
There is not many games where that is crazy.
It's backwards.
And then it was just like, I like coming up with control schemes that are interesting and unique. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so I thought, well, hey, we can have the keyboard be left and right, which is stomping back and forward, and the mouse is looking, because we needed to be able to look anywhere on the screen. So the head would turn. So it's almost like the restrictions of the artwork gave rise to this kind of control scheme.
It was very revolutionary at the time. I remember Ian explaining to me how he had been delivered, that he'd been delivered this asset, of this walker head, where it had been rendered in all these different positions, these different still frames. And I remember asking him, gosh, how was that done? And he was like, well, it's actually a three-dimensional model. This programmer had actually literally typed it in the three-dimensional coordinates to describe this head shape, and then had rendered it in different, positions. And at the time, that was very revolutionary. It was like, wow, people barely had a program that you could create a 3D asset in, because everything was 2D sprites. So it was very, very interesting.
When I played it growing up, we took it in turns with my brother. One would use the joystick, moving left and right, and one would use the cursor. I mean, the person with the joystick probably got the short end of the straw a little bit, because that is such a fun game. I've done a whole podcast on Walker, by the way. I've read the story, the manual story. It's absolutely crazy. I don't know if you guys were you guys involved in the story of the game, because it's ridiculously detailed. I
don't think so. Was that Steve at DMA did that, Ian? Do you know?
Yeah, probably. I can't honestly remember.
Yeah, I can't remember either. I think it might have been Steve, because we had a writer at DMA. Who, that's all he did was write stuff, and he also did a very entertaining company newsletter monthly, which usually had pictures of people falling out of pubs and such. But I think he maybe wrote that story.
It's crazy the story, but I love it. The time travel elements is so cool. I mean, you mentioned earlier about the innovations, the graphics of it were so incredible. Did you know at the time you were working on something quite special, or something that would still be talked about today? Because, guys, on Facebook and Twitter, I said, is there any questions for these gentlemen? And most of the things were all about Walker, I have to say. Are you surprised a little bit by that, about how much love there is for the game today?
A little bit, yeah. I mean, it's, it was definitely a fun project to work on, and Ian and I worked together really well. Very efficient. We're very similar in that way, So it was a lot of fun, and we got to learn a lot, and then we both basically kind of relocated to Dundee so we could work there, But it was a fun experience. It's very humbling that people enjoyed the game and that they still enjoy the game and think about it. I'm definitely honoured.
Yeah. Was there any features or any other elements that you thought you'd love to put into the game? Because I've heard rumours that there were going to be platforming levels in between the normal sort of levels. Is that true, or is there anything like that you can go into?
Ian can speak about
actually that existed. I was inspired by Prince of Persia and had created this whole underground labyrinth. It was essentially a rip-off of Prince of Persia. And I did all the art myself. And the idea was you would go down. There was like a hatch at the end of the level when you're on the walker stage, and you go down into that and you run around and you place bombs around in key locations. And there was an elevator section. There was bad guys shooting at you. And once you placed all the bombs, you had like 50 seconds or whatever to escape. And then that was the end of the level. And that was all functional and working. But at the end of it, they basically said, hey, we don't have the budget or time to do the art for this. So we're just going to have to cut it.
Other things that we did talk about along the way, which didn't get put into Walker 1, were, I remember, and this was fairly late in the development of the game, saying to Ian or suggesting, I'm like, hey man, maybe we should have some different weapons, because just firing the machine gun on the walker kind of gets boring after a while. Maybe we should be able, maybe we could add a couple of different weapons, like, a grenade launcher or a laser beam, or, something to kind of mix it up a little bit, just to add a bit of variety. But, at that point, basically, Ian was like, those are all great ideas, but it's too late, we just don't have any time for that anymore. So
it took a while. I mean, I think I'd been working on it for a year when I met you, Neill. And I mean, how many years? I mean, it took like at least 2 or 3 years. I seem to remember.
I can't remember. If I was to guess, I would say we probably worked on it at least a year. Between all the different things that we did, doing the graphic stuff, and then going up to Dundee to work with the artists who were doing the art, and then I was kind of art directing them a little bit. And
I mean, I know I started early 90, maybe even late 89. I can't remember when I got the Amiga. And, back then, it was not like a situation where you could survive on your own. I mean, I got my contract was £500 a month. Right. And so I was living with my parents. And so I was basically getting £500 a month in my bedroom coding Walker. And it literally went on forever. I mean, and then I met Neill. And then, that kind of accelerated a bit because there was like a really good, strong direction for the artwork. But then, like Neill was saying, they had already started doing art, because it was a long time before they actually got artists involved in the project. They wanted me to kind of work by myself before they really saw it as a viable project. And then when it started that to be viable, they brought artists in, and then, it was like they didn't really know what to do. I guess they kind of didn't have strong direction. And then Neill came in and provided that really strong direction, but it was too late to kind of make them kind of do what he wanted. And it kind of ended up like a bit of a mishmash, like between the kind of strong direction Neill had and what they were bringing to the table is what we ended up with, kind of like a different scale. I really liked Neill's original scale. It was like closer. Maybe we zoomed in a little bit, and then before we went to the kind of fully zoomed out, tiny characters.
Yeah, the problem I had with the characters was the characters as they shipped in Walker. They were so small, they were about maybe 6 or 8 pixels tall, that I couldn't, deliver the animation quality that I wanted with such a small character. So I made the characters a little bit bigger. I think they were maybe like 12 or 15 pixels high. Right. And just adding those few extra pixels allowed me to add a lot more detail to their motions and running behaviors and, firing weapons. And they would even you'd see them like fire a weapon, like blam, they'd fire the weapon, and then they would like crack the weapon open and reload the shells and then flip it up and fire the weapon again. There was just a lot of little details there, but you can't really get all that stuff in when they're really, really tiny. There's just not enough pixels to work with.
I mean, were you still proud when the game was shipped? Were you still happy with it, or did you? Obviously, you sound like there's things you really wanted to have in the initial game.
Yeah, I mean, it was fine. I mean, it was disappointing, of course, because especially when you're new to the industry, you want to prove yourself and show what you can do, and there wasn't as much of an opportunity there for me to show what I could do because most of that stuff wasn't in the game. But, that aside, I learned a lot, I mean, the things that I did create were things that I was like, I didn't even know if these things were possible. It was like, I'll just try. Maybe it's possible. Maybe it's not, So, I learned a lot, and those lessons are things that I took into other works, moving forward. So it wasn't a loss, but it was disappointing.
Oh, fair enough. Got my cat walking over here.
No worries. Yeah, I've got one on my lap, actually, yeah.
Yeah, I just want to. I'll go back to Walker a little bit in a minute, but DMA Design. I assumed you guys would be working in an office. Like a tight knit crew. But it sounds. How would you describe DMA Design throughout your time there?
We did finally get to the offices of DMA Design. That came later.
That was after Walker had shipped, and Dave was like, "Hey, Neill, we're sorry we couldn't put you right in the game, but we'll give you a job." So Ian and I relocated to Dundee, and then we were inside DMA's office. And it was a very, very interesting, fascinating time in the games industry. When I think about it, my memory is almost like, gosh, it's almost like that TV show The Office, this sort of comedic, somewhat bumbling, make it up as you go along, fly by the seat of your pants kind of, sort of structure. Like everyone was just kind of trying to figure stuff out. There wasn't a lot of precedent, right? I remember one of the business managers coming to me and having a serious conversation at one point. And he's like, but there's got to be some way that we can schedule these games. We've got to be able to get these games scheduled somehow. And me being the creative sort of quote unquote artist at the time was like, oh, but you can't schedule creativity. And, I'm like, you can't say, you can just invent things, within a schedule. And of course, now with hindsight, with 30 plus years of software development experience, I'm like, of course you can schedule these things, but at the time it didn't seem like that. But it was a very interesting, funny, quirky place full of very interesting, funny, quirky people. There was a lot of very clever people there, What's your take on it, Ian?
Oh no, I couldn't have seen it better myself. It was just a unique time, and it was actually my first kind of real job, which didn't actually last very long. I guess we'll get to those questions in a bit. But I mean, it's like it was really kind of, everybody there wasn't really a lot of direction. It was I think Dave Jones and his band, Merry Men, had all these hits and didn't really have a formula. Like when you look back on it now and you have all the experience you have, it was just kind of random luck in a way.
Mm-hmm. And it's almost like, have you guys seen the Black Mirror episode Bandersnatch?
Yes.
So when the guy goes into the guy's getting interviewed at the software studio. It's pretty much like that. That's pretty much what it was like. It's like, we'll give you graphics, we'll give you programmers, we'll have a sound person. It's going to be awesome. And you're like, okay, fair enough.
Yeah, no, that was really well done. That did capture the coding development scene in Britain in that era, in the late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah,
brilliant. I really enjoyed it as well. So Ian and Neill, correct me if I'm wrong. Ian, you didn't work on the Walker 2 sequel, did you? That you had left by, is that right? Or
no, I was still at DMA Design. I actually, I can't remember what my reasoning for not wanting to be part of that was, but they basically had me doing the Sega Genesis version of Walker. I think I was probably actually forced into that.
He hated that. God, I remember Ian.
I can't even remember that. I guess
I remember this well. Yeah. So we were in this big ass room, right? So there's me on one corner over here. and there's like, I think maybe 3 artists, and then Ian was around the corner in the same room. And David basically said to him, hey, this walker thing is fairly popular, people like it, but if we're going to make money out of this, we need to take it to the Sega Genesis. Mm-hmm. So he said to Ian, right, make it happen. And Ian's like, you do realize this game needs a mouse, right?
Yeah.
So poor Ian was basically trying to kind of figure out some way to make the game playable, where you're moving the cursor with the joypad and the walker with the buttons and, all this kind of stuff. Wow. And it was a bit of a nightmare, and while Ian was working on that, Dave was like, all right, Neill, get thinking about Walker 2. Mm. So I started putting my thinking cap on, and then as I kind of came up with little bits and pieces of ideas, I would take them around the corner to Ian and be like, hey, man, what do you think about this? And then Ian would be like, oh, well, maybe we could add a bit of that. And we did add, a tremendous amount of features. I still have pretty much all of my Walker 2 original design documents, and there was a huge amount of things that we planned to add. I mean, sort of the main ones would be, we wanted to stream the backgrounds, so we were going to use a CD-ROM format where as the walker moved along, as the scene moved along, it was actually being streamed off of a disc, because at that time streaming games with better quality graphics that could be rendered in real time were kind of becoming a bit of a thing. So it was like, and Ian had introduced me to 3ds Max at that point, and I'd been messing around with that. So it was like, okay, well, maybe we can use 3ds Max to render these very, very detailed, extremely detailed backgrounds, which have very deep levels of parallax, and then we will stream those backgrounds off the disk. And we will superimpose on top of that video feed sprites. So we'll add sprites on top, the little figures and tanks and planes flying around, helicopters, what have you. So that was kind of the plan from a high level in terms of, how the screen would look and behave. The other advantage to doing that was that if we streamed the backgrounds in, we could move the camera in innovative ways. So, not only was the game going to move left to right, there would be certain portions of the game where the walker's kind of, walking along the scene, where it would turn and look into the screen, and it would actually take off. Oh, and wow. the camera would fly into the screen. So now the background is actually coming towards you, and then the walker would land, it would land again on the ground, and then you would be moving kind of in a different direction. So it's far more dynamic, than the previous implementation. And then the other big innovation that was planned for the game, which again, and a lot of these things were extremely ahead of their time, was this kind of RPG customization element. So as we mentioned earlier on, one of the things that, I really wanted to see in the original game was more different weapons. So Ian and I sort of got together and we put our hats together and sort of thought about, well, what kind of different weapons could we come up with? And a lot of them were really sort of kooky, funny, entertaining ideas. And there was basically a sort of management screen within the game where you could see almost the interior of the cockpit of the walker, and there was 9 slots that you could kind of rack equipment into. So if you think about a server farm, you have server blades that you put into a rack. So basically you could rack in these components, I should say, and each of these components had a different function. So some of them might be a grenade launcher, some of them might be a rocket launcher, some of them were a laser thing. And there was all kinds of hilarious things. Like, the one I remember distinctly that was very funny was you had the walker and it would fire these kind of trash can like projectiles, and they would land on the ground, sort of clang, and then the trash can would sort of break open and there was a Terminator inside of it.
Oh, nice.
And this Terminator would begin massacring all the little men, the bad guys. So you've got this little sort of bad guys running around. So you're deploying Terminators into the battlefield and they're basically massacring all these little guys. So there was lots of really, really fun ideas that we came up with. And you could kind of go back to this management screen and pull out modules and put new modules in and swap them around. So there was a lot of innovations there, again, that unfortunately didn't see the light of day. The other innovation was the idea of business progression, so that when you started the game, you were kind of a lowly new employee of a new company, and then as you completed more missions, you earned more money, and your kind of home base grew larger and more exotic, and you could do bigger jobs and buy more equipment. So it was a bigger game in every sense of the word.
What platforms was it going to be made for? Was it still Amiga, or would it have gone beyond that?
I don't think so. I'm tempted.
It was the 3DO, wasn't it?
That's the one, Ian. It was that one, 3DO. Yeah, because 3DO was really big at that time, and that was where this CD streaming.
I was going to say, yeah, or unless it was a CD32, but yeah, it had to be, didn't it? And
it would have maybe trickled on from there to the Sega CD or something like that, maybe, had it actually ever been developed.
Ian, how close was the Mega Drive version to being released, may I ask? That wasn't released, was it either?
Oh, no, not at all. I remember I got like the background working, the parallax scrolling. I got the walker in there. I seem to remember that was about it.
Well, you got to the point where it was playable, and once we could play it on a Genesis joypad, we were all just like, this is crap.
Yeah, I can't remember exactly how. Yeah, you must have a better memory than me, but I seem to remember it before it even got that finished. We were like, I was exiting and Neill was exiting before me. So
right.
But yeah,
it is a shame because Walker, at the time of recording, I don't think it's going to change anytime soon. There's only one game in the series, and just on the Amiga and it's the ST, I think maybe. I mean, does the ROM exist for Walker on the Mega Drive, Ian? Is that even available? Is that long gone?
Oh, no. I mean, if it does, it would have been saved by someone at DMA Design.
Right.
I mean, it's kind of sad in a way, but like the project pretty much died when Neill left and then I left. I don't think anybody that I'm aware of attempted to salvage it beyond that point.
It would be nice if you have viewers who have lots of money. It would be nice to make Walker 2, though. I still think there's a lot of really good ideas in there that would make a fun game. It would probably be a lot easier to make it now with the technology that exists nowadays. You can do it all in real time.
What percentage would you say Walker 2 got to being completed, would you say?
It was only in pre-production.
Right.
So there was no playable. It was all basically documentation and paper. But the documentation was very thorough. It was stuff that you could hand to someone and they could follow and actually, create content with. Had a much more detailed story. We'd planned out a lot of the missions. The game was set in this kind of solar system with all these different planets, and you would travel to different planets for different jobs, and there would be cutscenes. I mean, it was very, very, very ambitious. And another thing that we did back in DMA Design at the time, which was very unorthodox and was extremely difficult to greenlight, but we managed to get it done, was I managed to persuade David Jones to let me hire an artist, someone who did not know anything about computers, was purely a painter. And this particular person, whose name was Alex, had a very interesting and unconventional art style. And they'd also, their passion was working in stop motion animation, but they were also a traditional illustrator. Right. And I said to Dave, I was like, hey, we should really hire this guy because he's just got this really weird art style that I think would be interesting for the game. And he could do some paintings for us that might help inspire the work that we then build, in pixel art or whatever. And obviously now in video games, this is normal. It's normal to hire concept artists and have them paint things right. But back then, that had never been done before, right? It was like, people were like, a painter? Why do you want a painter? He can't do anything on the computer. Why would we hire him? So we hired Alex and he came into the studio. So now we had, these pixel artists, me here, Ian in the corner, and then this guy with an easel and a paintbrush, right? Painting stuff.
Yeah.
And David Jones would come into the room and he would just be like scowling at this guy. Like, what's this guy with an easel doing over here,
do any of these paintings still exist for the Walker universe? Or?
I don't know. I have actually spoken to Alex. I looked him up a few years ago just to I was going to go back to Scotland to visit my family. And I was like, I wonder if he's still in Scotland. I was going to meet up with him. But he is, and he's still going and still has the very characteristic red hair he had. But I did not manage to meet up with him. But so, it was interesting. Unfortunately, after a certain amount of time, Dave was like, we can't justify having someone painting. So we need to let them go. And I had to tell Alex, I'm sorry, we have to let you go. But it was a shame, because he had a lot of really good ideas and he brought, a new type of creativity to the game, and had we actually been able to make the game and incorporate some of his work into it, I think it would have really turned it up to 11.
Bit of a personal question for both you guys. Why so Neill, you left first, then Ian, you left soon after. Is that right? Can I ask why did you leave? And again, it's a little bit rude, but do you think if you did stay on, Walker 2 would have been completed? I mean, Neill, why did you leave?
Yeah. I don't mind answering that question. Basically, my reason for leaving was I met a woman that I wanted to continue being in a relationship with, but the problem was she lived in America.
Okay.
So when she left to go back to the States, I was like, okay, well, I'll see if I can get a job in America, and then we can continue this relationship. And that meant leaving DMA. Would Walker have continued had Ian and I stayed there? Maybe. I mean, I don't know. It's hard to say. What do you think, Ian?
I think there's a good chance that it would have, at least for sure, the Sega version. I'm not sure. I wasn't really that involved in the Walker 2, but I remember Dave Jones was very disappointed when I handed my resignation as well, because he was basically like, yeah, that's the end of the project now. And you want to finish your thought, Neill?
I don't remember what the rest of my thought was.
Well, I guess I'll answer the same question. So I was on vacation, and I got a call from Neill. He's like, "Hey, there's a company that's hiring for programmers in America." I was like, "Hell yeah, I'm going to call them." And so I called them and got an interview. And it was funny. Like, we were actually sharing an apartment in Dundee, and so I do my interview, and I guess it was Jeff Spangenberg. He was the president of Iguana I was talking to, and he was like, is this number the same as Neill's number? I was like, yeah. That was in the old days where you didn't have cell phones. You had like a telephone in your
landline,
landline.
Yeah, gosh, that was even just the whole coming to America thing was quite the saga in itself.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And I guess I had my father had raised me on a steady diet of Clint Eastwood movies and Dirty Harry, and so I'd always wanted to come to America. So it was a no-brainer for me.
Yeah. But it was great because Ian and I were both pretty excited about it. In that hey, we're going somewhere different, but we'll get to keep working together.
Yeah, that's great.
And we did do a number of collaborations and works together at Iguana. And Ian was instrumental in creating, again, some groundbreaking, paradigms. For example, if you think about Turok, the way that Turok is controlled on the Nintendo 64 controller, the notion of moving your body with the yellow buttons and adjusting your gaze with the analog stick, that had never been done before. And that as soon as Ian invented that paradigm as an experiment in Iguana, everyone knew as soon, because he showed it to me. He's like, hey, I've been messing around with this thing over here. What do you think? Do you think this might work? And I was like, I was moving my body with the yellow buttons, and I was trying to move my head with the analog stick, and my head's going all over the place like crazy. And I'm like, oh man, this is kind of hard to get used to. And he's like, no, but you can actually move to the side and turn your head so you can circle strafe around things. And I was like, holy shit, you're right. Fuck, that's awesome, And, as soon as Turok shipped with that control scheme, that was the de facto way that FPS games on controllers worked moving forward. And that was entirely Ian's invention.
I didn't know that, Ian. That's amazing. We'll talk about Iguana soon if you don't want, but just to finish up DMA Design, it obviously later became Rockstar, which is maybe one of the most powerful companies today. I mean, it's crazy how powerful they are with the GTA series. Yeah. I mean, you weren't involved in. You weren't there when they were changing their name and so forth, were you? I assume you left before then. Is that true? Or?
Well, there is. I do have an interesting couple of interesting Rockstar stories. So David Jones came to me at one point when I was still there, when we were working on Walker 2, and he said, "Hey, there's this new company in America called Rockstar." And they've approached us because we've had success with Lemmings, and they want to talk to us, and they're interested in working with us on a game. And I was like, okay, fair enough. And I'm like, so what's the deal then? And he's like, well, They don't have any ideas for games, but what they do have is they have a large music library that they've licensed. So, they've basically locked down the rights to use lots of popular music in games. What can we do with that?
Right.
And I was like, well, that's interesting. And I was like, well, maybe we could make a game that's a music game. So I basically spent several months designing probably one of the world's first music games. And it was all about, you starting and forming a band, playing in small pubs and clubs and working your way up to Wembley Arena and such. And, where you were performing these songs. And I think it was a Sega Genesis game, because I've still got diagrams and all of the design documentation for all this stuff. And you would be pushing buttons, and you could move between different members of the band during the performance, but you could also kind of move what they were playing on their instruments in time to the music. So it was all about performing in time to the music, and you could kind of play like conventionally with a guitar, but you could put it behind your head and go, do these kind of crazy things. And so that's kind of, one of the things that I did for Rockstar and DMA, and there's a fairly significant amount of documentation for that. But that, again, that sort of died on the vine when I left. But I do also remember just before I left DMA Design in Dundee, David Jones talking to me about Grand Theft Auto, and he was like, hey, one of the artists came to me the other day with this idea for a game. I wanted to ask you what you thought about it.
Right.
And I was like, okay, yeah, what's that? And he's like, basically, they want to do a game where you're kind of running around a city and, you're shooting people and stealing cars and carjacking and stuff like that. And I was like, wow, that sounds like it could be a fun game. But do you think morally that's something that's a good idea, or do you think that's something that we want to have the studio be associated with? And Dave was like, And then I was away, right? So, my claim to fame was, being the person who was like, should we morally make GTA? Of course.
You almost stopped the series, yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, not so much that, but, it's just kind of one of those dumb moments in history where you're like, if you'd been on the right side of it, you could have been rich, eh? But, such is the way things go.
Yeah. And Ian, were you involved into any of these little stories, or?
No.
A long time, yeah. Actually, before we move on to Iguana, I want to talk. I think I sent you guys a video a few months ago, but there was another Walker game. I don't know if you're aware of this, made by a gentleman called Mike Clark, who I've interviewed before. He used to work for Psygnosis. He actually was making a PS3 game called the Walker game. That was never released either, but I don't know if you've seen the clips of that. It's kind of a 3D. After the interview, I'll send it to you if I can find it again, because he very kindly shared a video with me. I hope it's still working. And again, it just shows you there's still, I don't know who owns the rights for Walker anymore. Have you got any ideas, or?
I don't know. Yeah, I would imagine probably the last person who tried to make a Walker game would be a good person to ask, because they probably had to, to find out who owns that,
It's mad, isn't it? I have to talk to Mike again, try and remind myself. Well, let's move on. So you both went on to the US, Iguana Entertainment, obviously. And what were the first games you worked on there? Was it the Turok games, or do you remember?
For me, the first game I worked on there was a Sega Genesis title for Sunsoft called Zero the Kamikaze Squirrel.
Yeah.
Which was a kind of Mario-esque platforming game, but it also had vehicles, jetpacks, speedboats, things like that in it. And what was it you were working on at the start over there, Ian?
That is a good question. So I know when I started, they had just, I guess they'd gotten the rights to doing the comics, Valiant Comics or something, the Turok series. Was that the name of the comic? And they had, like, I was hired as what they called, and I think you were as well, Neill, like a designer planner. That's what they called them. And so I was kind of leaving my programming role behind and stepping into design shoes. But the problem is like they didn't have room for another project. And so I think I ended up helping out on a kind of mixture of projects. I might have helped a little bit on your title, Neill. I know I helped out on Batman Forever, Coin Op.
And there was Iggy's Wrecking Balls, and he worked on
Iggy's,
that.
Yeah.
Turok worked on.
Yeah, well, yeah. And so it got to a point where they were like, we have all these people working on Turok, and none of them have done a video game before. Oh. So and we don't have a project for you to manage or design, so we need you to basically program on Turok. So that's how I ended up on Turok.
I mean, it's a great game. FPS dinosaur game. Who would have, absolutely incredible idea. What was it like working on that? You said you designed the control system, Ian. Did you?
Yeah.
Do you look back with a lot of pride? Yeah.
Yeah, I do. It was a difficult project to be on because there was a lot of kind of inexperienced people, and just to give you an example, like doing the UI for the screen. This artist had done this really immaculate digits for the score or the numbers to be represented, but they were all like 64 by 64 or 128 by 128 pixels, which is huge for something that's to be displayed on the screen. I was like, well, wait a second, you're going to have to shrink that way down. It was just little frustrations. So I mean, I was young, kind of egocentric, cocky, and so it wasn't a good fit for me initially, but I ended up just basically doing the kind of game logic and programming. And that was actually quite rewarding. I mean, they pretty much just threw most of that on my shoulders. There was one other guy, really talented guy, Rob Cohen, who did all the technology and tools. And he was definitely ahead of his time. He went off and did his own company, I think was it called Edge of Reality, I think.
Yeah.
And he did all the tools technology, and I was basically the main programmer guy, and I managed to essentially kind of semi-designed a lot of how the character felt, when you ran across the ground, when you jumped in the water, when you climbed up things, all the camera motions and behaviors. And even did a lot of, because Jurassic Park was in the theaters. I don't exactly know when, but we'd all seen it. And I was just fascinated by the velociraptors, how they would make these noises and communicate with each other. And so I came up with this elaborate simulation of dinosaurs that made sounds, and it would be kind of like this, almost like this radar ping. They would go out, and then other dinosaurs would pick it up and home towards that area, because I really wanted to capture that feel of these dinosaurs were smart, right? Unfortunately, that all got axed in favor of the simpler, there's the player, run straight at it, But it was a lot of fun. And then later on in the project, they brought in some other talented people, and they kind of did bosses and other things that I couldn't handle on the schedule, because that went over budget, over time, and we all worked a lot of overtime.
Yeah, it's not surprising that the project ran long and big, because this was something that was being done that had never been done before. I mean, at the time in the industry, all video games were 2D, sprite-based games. And Turok was one of the first ever games, which had like real 3D characters and real 3D worlds and soft-skinned weighted meshes, with, vertex animations and, even getting, a dinosaur. I mean, I remember, sort of peeking in people's offices, and you'd see, oh, I've got the dinosaur walking. It's like, it's just in a looped animation, and people are crowding around the door, being like, oh, fuck, look at that. Fucking hell, look at that dinosaur. Holy shit. It was a really big deal. People were very excited about it. And then when we got that walk cycle dinosaur actually in the game, where it could walk around and chase you and stuff, people were just like losing their minds, like kind of like Ian was saying with the Jurassic Park thing. It was a very similar kind of moment for people who were seeing that. Are like, wow, this is amazing. The dinosaurs are walking around in 3D. But of course, everything was much more difficult. Level design was more difficult. Like there was just so much to learn. We were making all these different puzzles, and it's like, making jumping puzzles in first person is really difficult because, people constantly fall. And, so there was just a ton of stuff to learn there, but also a lot of real innovation. We hired people. We hired an animator who was a professional cell animation, literally the old school cartoon animators, never worked with a computer in their life. We hired that person to do the animations for the dinosaurs. And so they had to learn like how to animate these skeletons and, like a stop motion animator, pivot them all around between these keyframes. And, it was a major learning curve. But once that person, I believe it was Shane was their name, got their head around it, the work they delivered was just phenomenal. Like, oh, here's a raptor eating a human. So you'd see this hapless human walking along, and this velociraptor would jump on them and chew them and throw them around the place. And we were all just like, oh my God, this is amazing. So there was a lot of new technology, a lot of difficulty, but the results that were delivered were, I mean, there was just no one else doing work like that at the time.
Was it released before GoldenEye? I'm just trying to get the timescale right.
I think so. I'd need to Google that to look at the timeline, but I think so, yeah.
I think it was because I seem to remember they added a control scheme that was Turok's.
Mm.
In it as an option.
Interesting. So, yeah, that makes sense then, yeah. I mean, it wasn't really released on any other platform, was it? I think it was on PC, but it wasn't on PlayStation. I mean, it's a great series and it's very popular, but I guess just thinking about it, you would think maybe it's more settled for a PlayStation sort of game. But was it all? Why was it N64? May I ask? Was it just the contract? Or?
I think it was the most competent device at the time, and Iguana had entered into a strategic partnership with Nintendo,
right.
And Nintendo had entered into a strategic partnership with Silicon Graphics because you needed these SGI workstations to actually create some of the content. Or to run portions of your code simulating the N64 on the Silicon Graphics workstation. And those workstations were really hard to come by, and they were also incredibly expensive. I mean, can you remember, Ian, how much they were? I think they were maybe 30 grand a piece or something.
Yeah, I was going to say 25k a pop.
Yeah, and we had maybe 6 or 8 of them or something. The artists were fighting over them, to try and get one later on. But it was crazy times.
And you both worked on the sequel, is that right? Turok 2.
I think I did a little bit of minor. I didn't really do too much work on Turok 1 or Turok 2. I designed some of the different puzzle rooms. I worked with Dave Dinspear, who was the lead designer on the project, and mentored him in some areas, of the game's design. But I was busy doing, I believe, Batman Forever when Turok was going on. I think anyway. Right.
But yeah, Ian, what was you worked on Turok 2 a lot. What was your big sort of things you wanted to add into the original game then? Was there any big elements?
It was just, Turok 2 just seemed like more of everything.
Yeah.
It really was. And was that the first version that used the expansion thing?
Yeah, the memory.
So we could up the resolution.
Yeah.
And then there was this whole thing where they wanted dynamic lighting.
Yeah.
So I ended up so the N64 had this microcode, which was essentially the graphics library running on a chip, and I had to basically hack that. I got the source. I think we were one of the few studios that got the source code to that, and so I had to figure out how to write code for SIMD instruction set, which I'd never done before, and then I had to there was no room, so I had to take out features of that and replace it with dynamic lighting, which I finally figured out. But boy, that was a tough project. There's a lot. I guess the money influx from Turok. Remember at the time they were quoting they'd sold 1.7 million units.
Staggering.
But we also, we had, going back to Turok 1 just briefly, we had done a ton of overtime. At one point we were doing 7 days a week. There was basically no time off. And I later learned from one of the owners that basically they were this close to closing a claim.
Really?
If they'd gone another week, they would have shut the doors. And that was before Turok 1 launched. So
that saved the company.
Yeah,
do you think?
Basically. Yeah.
Saved
the company.
What do you think of the series? Yeah. So I was going to ask you, do you think it should come back? It's still a big IP, isn't it? I don't know.
I think it's a very challenging IP. There's been several attempts to resuscitate Turok, over the last couple of decades, and they've all had very mixed results. There was one, I believe, maybe in the Xbox 360 era that was quite nicely executed. Had nice high fidelity environments, some nice dinosaurs and characters. And I thought that was a really solid and competent effort. But even then, it didn't seem to stick with the public. The public are a fickle bunch. it's difficult to kind of, put things together and be like, okay, people are going to love that, there's just something about the Turok brand. There's parts of it, I think, that are very appealing. But then there's other parts of it that, for whatever reason, they just don't seem to stick with the public as well. So I'm not confident that, the world needs another Turok game. But, do we need more good games with dinosaurs in them? Well, yeah, I mean, everybody loves dinosaurs.
Of course, yeah. Yeah. I've got to ask you, because you later went on to make South Park, another FPS game, a game you wouldn't really see as a traditional FPS kind of genre title, but it was well received. People loved it. I mean, Neill, you didn't work on that, did you? Or did you both work on that? Or
no, I was the principal person responsible for South Park.
Oh, apologies.
And it was a very incredibly challenging. It's one of the most difficult projects I've ever worked on because of the time. We only had, I believe, maybe 8 months to make the whole game, which is like ridiculous. It's like no time at all, practically. And so because we didn't have much time to make the game, the first thing we had to figure out was, okay, well, what technology do we have on hand? Well, we've got the Turok engine. Okay, well, therefore, the South Park game is going to be first person because that's what we have on hand. And I would basically fly out to LA and New York each month. So I would go over to Comedy Central in New York, and then I would fly to LA to Casa Bonita, where Matt and Trey were. And I would have to basically sell them on, this idea that, okay, we have to use a first-person game. It has to be first-person camera. And I worked very closely with Matt and Trey on the design of the game. And then the Columbine shooting happened.
Right.
And when the Columbine shooting happened, then Comedy Central were like, okay, this idea of a first-person shooting game with children, no way, stop. There's this, the whole game is like frozen. And, we had this fully staffed, large team working on this. It's like a train that cannot be stopped, right? So there was this mad scramble of like, oh my God, what the hell are we going to do? We've got this whole team working on this game. We have to have this game finished in 6 months now. The shooting has happened. How the fuck are we going to get around this problem? And I can't remember where the idea came from, whether it was Peyton Duncan, one of the lead artists, or myself or someone else. But someone mentioned, they're like, well, what about if instead of, them having guns, like shotguns and things like that, we had kind of alternate things that were toy-like instead of guns, but they still served the role of a gun. So, for example, rather than your basic pistol, bang, 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 you had just a snowball. So that was like your pistol, and then your kind of modified shot was the yellow snowball. So then we came up with all these different, gadgets like, Nerf guns, the sniper chicken, the cow launcher. It was an absolute Hail Mary. It's like, oh, fuck, if we pitch these toy weird weapon things and this doesn't stick, we're fucked. The game is cancelled, And so I went out to New York to meet with Comedy Central with Larry Lieberman and all the rest of them. And we pitched this and they were like, we love it. This is great. This gets around the problem. Nice work, guys. Go, get it done. So then I had to go over to LA and, get Matt and Trey to sign off on it. And they were like, oh, this is awesome. We love it. So we immediately rushed back and started kind of, working on it. But it was very, very difficult. It was a very tight, compressed time frame. We were also competing with the movie because the South Park guys were making the South Park movie at the time. So I was trying to get Matt and Trey into the studio to do all the VO, all the dialogue for the game, because I wrote this big script of all the lines the kids say in the game. And we needed to get them into the studio to record all that stuff. So between them recording for the show, for the movie, and then for the game, we were constantly trying to compete for their attention. And we didn't have time within the production of the game to make any changes to anything. So the only way that we could really make that manageable was to keep them really in the loop. So again, I would basically take a new version of the game. Every month I would fly to LA with a new cartridge and put it in the machine at Casa Bonita, and they would play it and we'd talk about stuff, because we just didn't have time for there to be a miscommunication about how something was going to work, where we would then reinvent it, right? There was just no time for that at all. So, the game, Is it the best FPS game in the world with the best level design in the world? No, absolutely not. Is it a fun South Park, themed game? Absolutely. There's lots of people that, still say to me, gosh, I remember playing, the multiplayer mode of South Park on the N64 with my little brother and sister and having such a lot of fun. So, it's one of the games that I'm most proud of, not because of the quality of the game, which is so, but for the team. The team did an incredible job, worked incredibly hard under very difficult conditions to deliver the best game that they possibly could. And so, I'm just incredibly proud of everybody who worked on that game. It's a miracle that it actually got done, to be honest.
I've got to ask you two gentlemen fans of South Park? Do you watch the cartoon?
I love it. Yeah, I love South Park. Love it. I'd love to make a new South Park if Matt.
Would you?
Call me.
Ian, you worked. What was your role in the game? May I ask? Were you?
I'm not sure. I worked on the first person shooter South Park. There was another South Park game which I was the lead programmer on.
Is that Love Shack?
South Park Chef's Love Shack.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's.
Oh yeah, I've got it. Yeah.
I think, like Neill was saying, I'm very proud just of the team effort, because we really did our best in such a tight timeline. But there it goes.
Neill showing the books.
It was weird. It was like, we had I think they told us initially 6 months to do this game, and I was like, okay, well, let me think about the plan. I worked with the designer, planner, project manager, and we came up with a plan where it was like, we needed like 10 programmers to pull this off. And so we're in this big powwow meeting with the studio leads, and they're like, oh, we can get you 3 or 4 programmers. I was like, I'm going to need 10 programmers. And they were pissed at us, but they actually got it. It was like, a retelling of the Dirty Dozen, that movie, where you get any programmer you can
nice.
and train them up. I had, people who hadn't written more than 2 lines of code. They didn't even know what for loops were.
I don't know what they are.
And so we managed to do it. I mean, we got pretty close to getting everything done within the 6 months. There was like some overage with the PC version, because like that has many different incarnations and the testing's a lot harder. But it was a fun project to work on. I'm proud of that effort to get it done in that amount of time. But I think, when I look at the final product, it's just too small. Like, it was like a trivia-based thing. It didn't have a lot of questions. I don't think we really capitalized. I mean, there should have been way more kind of mini games in it. I mean, to those who are listening who don't really know what it was basically like a Mario Party ripoff. The idea was you had, chef given these questions, and then you had to answer them kind of trivia style, and then you would jump into mini games.
Right. Yeah.
You can see on the back.
Yeah. Yeah, and did you work with Matt and Trey as well, Ian?
No, I never actually had the pleasure of meeting those guys. It was a fun project.
So, guys, may I ask, how long were you at Iguana after after South Park games, or did you go separate ways, separate paths after that, or were there any other games you worked together on?
Gosh, that's a good question. I'm struggling to even remember when I left Acclaim. Sometime in the late 90s, I guess. But it's weird because, although Ian and I worked really closely together in Scotland at DMA and such, when it came to working in America, it was always like this kind of double helix sort of DNA strand, where it's like, can we not work on the same thing together? It's like, no, you're going to work on different things, and then you'll kind of occasionally you'll meet and work on this little thing together.
Yeah.
So we didn't get to work together in the same way, which is a shame, really. But such are the organizational forces that be,
Yeah.
You guys have gone on to create some other huge titles. Again, I've got it's unbelievable, really. So, Ian, I've got here, Juice X, Thief, Contra 4, and Neill. I mean, it's mad. Doom. I've got here Torn as well. Some huge titles. I mean, I know we can talk about how working in separate quarters again. But what game that we haven't really mentioned are you most proud of out of those lists I've just mentioned? Is there a game you think, oh yeah, that's where I've really shown what I can do?
Well, for me personally, I think Torin is closest to my heart because it's one of the few games that I've had complete creative control over.
Right.
In terms of the total vision of the product, and I got a chance to work with some incredibly talented people. It was a very small team, but that was a really fascinating project to work on because it was a virtual reality game, and obviously VR. Whenever I do different games or different things, I always try to learn new things or bring innovations to the work in some way, shape, or form. So, working in virtual reality and trying to tell a story, how do you tell a story in VR when you can't control the camera or where the player's looking? These are all very interesting problems to solve. We also used some proprietary fluid simulation. One of the things that's interesting and unusual about Torn is that the central character that you interact with is this kind of disembodied soul that's represented as a real-time three-dimensional fluid simulation. So as you talk to this person and they talk back, this kind of fluid blob is kind of reacting in real time to the speech that they're saying. But because it's VR, you can kind of poke them. you can actually splash them. So you'll kind of take your hand and they'll kind of go bloop, and then they'll kind of bloop. They kind of join back together again. But that was really fascinating, and it was great to kind of work with the art team to get the visual tone of the mansion correct, and the feel of the rooms and the technology, and work with Gary Scheinman, who is the composer who worked on BioShock, to get the music right, and record all of that music with orchestras and all that stuff. So that was another very small team. Over a relatively short time, the game, I think it cost just over $1 million to make, which is not a lot of money. But it was a very, very high quality product. So that's probably the more recent of my works that I'm most proud of, because I had a chance to really kind of steer the direction.
How about yourself, Ian? Is there a game you're really proud of that you think, wow, this is my best work kind of thing?
I think sadly I may still be waiting for that game, but like with hindsight, I look back on my work in Turok and I really like that. I think I mean there was a game I did. It was just a personal project, VR. It was like Dawn of the Robot Empire. It was like a shooter. I really enjoyed working on that, just because like the VR space is so new and unique, the way you interact with it. I've always been kind of into coming up with new ways of interactions.
Yeah.
Being in this industry for such a long time, you get kind of bored, like, oh, it's like an analog stick and buttons, or two analog sticks. It's kind of, you're looking for something different. And so I really like my work I've done in VR. And even outside of that, I've had the opportunity to work on VR training simulations, which are really, just from that perspective alone, the interaction in the VR world it's a lot of fun to work on stuff like that.
Yeah, I think the same. Sorry, go ahead, Ian.
I was just going to say, and a lot of my other work has been in the app space. Like I kind of switched gears in 2003 and basically moved into the mobile area. And I've kind of been doing basically mobile stuff until VR recently, mobile apps. And probably the proudest one I ever worked on, I know it's not a game, but I worked on NPR radio.
Okay.
For the iPhone. That was like my biggest claim to fame in the iPhone space.
That's very impressive. Yeah.
And one of the new things that's coming out, which is very exciting, is high quality augmented reality. Using LiDAR, where you can have occlusion. Devices such as the Magic Leap or the HoloLens, for example, and we'll soon see with the Apple glasses. There's rumors that they are have similar functionality. But I think that for me is another kind of frontier, in terms of, hey, wouldn't it be interesting to make an experience that's an augmented reality entertainment experience that leverages, the LiDAR for occlusion, because that's really the game changer, is the ability for the holograms to be occluded by your environment.
Yeah, no, good. I was actually kind of linked to that. What projects or games are you currently working on at the moment? Are you happy to share some details, or is it all hush hush?
Well, I can share sort of some vague details. Right now, one of the things that I'm doing at Panic Button obviously is best known for our world-class supporting work. So we bring, Doom from the PC to the Switch and so on. But we're diversifying, and one of the things I'm helping the studio with is to grow our own internal IP team so that we can make our own intellectual properties.
Right.
So over the last several months, we've been running an initiative at the studio to gather ideas from all of the different employees at the studio. And right now we are in the process of reviewing all of those different ideas to pick, which ones we will then go forward to the next stage of the process with, which will be diligence before we move to pre-production. And that's really exciting. And we've already, got some amazing ideas. The team at Panic Button is full of, incredible engineers, but very talented artists and creatives. So there's going to be some exciting new IP coming from Panic Button maybe about a year from now.
Good stuff. I'm looking forward to it. How about yourself, Ian? What are you up to these days? What games?
Unfortunately, I can't really comment at all. NDAs and such. But I hope to, like Ian, I'm losing my brain here. Like Neill was saying, I'm really looking forward to working on augmented reality stuff in the future. I really see that as like the next frontier.
Yeah, I think AR is going to be as big a technological splash as smartphone technology. So if you think about the paradigm shift between flip phones, clamshells, with push buttons, and smartphones with a touch screen, that was a huge game changer. When AR, with LiDAR functionality becomes, the norm, it's going to be as big a paradigm shift, I think.
Good stuff. I'm excited as well, to be fair. I've got to ask, guys, what is your personal favourite video game of all time? It can be a classic, it can be quite a recent title. What game would you rank as your favourite?
Boy, that's a really difficult question. I know a couple of the recent ones that I've played that I really enjoyed a lot are Ghost of Tsushima. That's a very solid single-player game, but the Legends mode, where you can play with friends online, is fantastic. I've also really been enjoying Microsoft Flight Simulator, which is a very kind of, relaxing kind of, I'm just going to fly around Edinburgh and kind of check out the old haunts and such. It's amazing what they've done with that, with the technology and populating the satellite images with little trees and houses and so on.
Yeah, no, I've heard it's amazing. You can find your house, can't you? Everything is
pretty
incredible.
Much. Yeah.
How about yourself, Ian? Have you got a top game of all time? It's a real tough question.
Yeah, that's unfair.
It's a bit unfair.
I don't know. Recent memory would be Breath of the Wild.
Oh yeah,
that's a masterpiece. If you go back further, it maybe be something like Mario 64, which I think just blew my mind, and the camera and the control.
Yeah, I think Mario 64 is definitely in my top 5. For all the reasons that Ian mentions, there was just so many groundbreaking innovations.
Yeah, and Ocarina of Time as well. I don't know if you guys man.
Any of the Zeldas. Yeah, the Zeldas are amazing. Just incredible.
We can talk about Zelda. Breath of the Wild. I'm looking forward to the sequel as well, which is going to come out next year, I hope. Look, guys, I've got a couple quick questions to finish up. It's been such a good chat. You've mentioned a few already, but maybe you can choose a different game. Are there any games that you started to work on in the past that were never released? And if so, is there any game you think, I wish it was released because I think that would have been really successful? I can't accept Walker 2. We've spoken about Walker enough, really.
Yeah.
Is there any other games you think you'd love to have seen released?
Probably one of the biggest games that I did some pre-production on that wasn't released was BioShock 4.
Oh.
So basically, kind of this question of, after BioShock Infinite, which was obviously the city in the clouds, Ken left the BioShock brand to form his own studio. So BioShock as an IP was adrift. And I was asked, working at a studio, to ideate, what could BioShock 4 be? What would it be about, and what would the setting be, and so on. And I worked on that for, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 months or something like that, and did, hundreds of drawings and illustrations and story treatments and so on. And, that didn't come to pass, but, I think there was definitely a fair amount of stuff that was developed there that would have been really, really cool.
Would it have been underwater or would it have been in the air? Can I ask that question? Or?
Neither.
Neither, okay. Yeah. I've just played the first BioShock for the first time, BioShock Remastered. I've never really played the games before, but I was blown away how good it was. I haven't played any other sequels, but I'm going to. And BioShock 4, it's a shame, isn't it? Because I know Ken Levine, isn't it? Levine, he's moving to other stuff, but it's a huge brand.
Yeah, and it's very challenging. It's, as I was saying to my colleagues when we were looking at this, it's like, make no mistake, BioShock is, the most complex narrative brand in the world. But like, as a game, like the stories that BioShock engages in, as well as the sort of cultural commentary that those stories promote. And the depth, Ken went to great depth to make the characters interesting and multidimensional. And it's a very tall order to follow, to try to sort of create a work that follows that's of similar high quality. It's very challenging.
Can I ask, Neill, is BioShock 4 not going to happen, full stop?
Well, the version, as far as I understand it, BioShock 4 is in production right now. But it has no bearing, as far as I understand, on the work that I did.
Okay, that's really interesting, and I don't know, Ian, can you top that? Because BioShock 4 is pretty big one.
Oh, I absolutely cannot top that. But in terms of just a personal project I was working on, it was a game called The Day I Tried. Oh. It was a zombie simulator, and I had to abandon it due to kind of family, personal reasons.
Right.
But I think that's probably the most proud kind of individual project I've worked on. I developed it all myself. I really loved the control method. It was like an iPad thing. It could run on the iPhone, but it was really designed to take advantage of the larger screen format. Yeah. And it was like top-down isometric zombie simulation. And the idea was kind of like, to simulate like smell, sight, noise, and have the classical dumb zombies, but they're, they can overwhelm you because there's so many of them. Kind of capture that kind of true spirit of the zombie universe. I don't like all these manic kung fu sprinting zombies. It's a bit much for me. Yeah.
Could you not get that project off the ground again if it's a bit of a pet project of yours, or is that?
I could. There was actually a surprising amount of interest in it. IGN actually covered it in development, and that generated a lot of people interested in it who were also very disappointed that I stopped working on it. It could definitely be resurrected, but I think I'm far removed from the 20-something energetic work all night person that I used to be. Sadly, I have to accept that I'm 50-something at this point, and so maybe there's other things that life has, instead of working all hours on a video game. But
I get it.
I'd love to resurrect it, but it's really just a question of money and time at this point.
Yeah. Well, are you guys currently living in? So, are you still in the US then, both of you gentlemen? Is that right? Yeah. Do you get a chance to go back to Scotland often, or is that? I mean, you must.
I usually go back every year. To see family. COVID aside, of course. Which obviously messed up everyone's travel plans. Yeah. But usually I go back every year.
Yeah. And have yourself in? Do you get a chance to get back to your old stomping ground?
Yeah, every few years. Not as frequent as every year, but every few years for sure. And the pandemic's kind of messed things up.
Yeah, of course.
My son's actually over there visiting his grandmother right now. He's on a big long vacation.
Good stuff. Look, I've really enjoyed today's chat. And I want to say thank you as well for making like Walker. It's one of my favourite games in the Amiga, I have to say. So I appreciate it. And some of the titles you guys have worked on are absolutely incredible. We could keep talking all day, to be honest, but I know we can't. You guys are busy people. My final question, and I know you answered this already in the text interview, so you're welcome to change it, is if you could share a few drinks with any video game character, who would you choose and why? Neill, do you want to go first?
Gosh, I don't know. I'd have to give that one some thought. That's a difficult question.
It's a tough one. Unless you've got Ian, have you got one to go? Or
I know you've asked me this before in the past, but I guess I'm allowed to change my answer. I have no idea. Video game character, boy.
2 shots with Sonic.
You could go with Sonic, yeah. He'd be a quick drinker.
He'd be pished in no time.
Yeah, maybe it'd be a lemming, and it'd be like, "What the hell, dude?"
Yeah, it's difficult because so many video game characters are shallow. It's like there's not really. You can't imagine having an interesting conversation with Pac-Man. You know what I mean? He's not exactly known for his political position on things. You know what I mean? Yeah. So it's hard to say.
No, that's true. That's true. Maybe.
But video game creators, like, I'd love to sit down and have dinner with Shigeru Miyamoto and.
Yes.
And talk to him about design philosophy or what his observations are of gaming trends and what he thinks are the future of gaming trends. That's a little bit easier question for me.
Yeah, I second that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, guys, thank you so much for your time today. It's been real fun, real pleasure, and I love hearing these stories. So. Really good luck for the rest of your careers and so forth. And hopefully we can stay in contact. So thank you.
I love it. Yeah, thank you so much for the invitation. It's been great to talk to you and meet you and just kind of reminisce about this stuff again.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Neil. Thank you, Ian, as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.